Hey, if you like my videos, you might also like my comedy series YouTube Blue, which premieres every Saturday on the YouTube Blue YouTube channel. Go check out the link in the description and the card above to watch the latest episode. Now on with the video. The Amazing Spider-Man is a pretty good movie, but not without its missteps. So once I decided that I would fix The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I thought I might as well fix this movie too. First, I gotta talk about the boundaries I'm setting. I'm keeping the same villain, not changing that. In fact, all the core concepts will stay the same. Unlike something like my Superman 3 rewrite, I'm gonna try to keep this as something that would actually be a rewrite rather than a reimagining, though this is still a pretty big rewrite by industry standards. I might change the order of some events structurally, but they're all there for the most part. The only major thing I'm changing is the finale. I know that's what he did in the comics, but the Lizard's plot to turn everyone in New York into lizard people is a little too comic book-esque. I know, it's a movie about a teenager with spider powers fighting a half-man, half-lizard creature. But the movie really aims to make that feel realistic so that it's different from the Sam Raimi movies, which really embraced its comic book roots. And it does that pretty well up until the finale. If I, as a big fan of comic book movies, find it jarring enough from the realistic tone of the rest of the movie that I feel my suspension of disbelief disappear, I think general audiences probably felt that way too. So I'm changing it. Also, I'm keeping the parent stuff. I know, but I can kind of respect the angle they went with adding some mystery around Peter's parents. I probably wouldn't do that if I was making a Spider-Man movie, but I get it. The main problem I'm going to be attempting to fix is a lack of consistency. This movie starts as a movie about a kid trying to find out what happened about his parents. Then, when Uncle Ben dies, there's an immediate shift, and now it's a movie about a kid with superpowers trying to avenge the death of his uncle. Then, once the Lizard gets involved, it becomes a movie about a superhero trying to save the world. So, I want to fix that and make it all one movie. A movie about fatherhood, and to me, a Spider-Man origin movie should show Peter becoming more like Spider-Man every minute. In the original, Peter becomes Spider-Man like halfway through, but he shouldn't be Spider-Man until the end of Act 3. Alright, enough talk, let's get into it. So instead of opening with Peter as a kid, that scene of his parents leaving is going to be told through flashbacks throughout the film as it becomes relevant. We open at Peter's high school. I'm a firm believer that the first 10 minutes of a film should be dedicated to establishing the characters and world. We meet everybody, establish their relationships with each other, etc. At that 10-minute mark is when Peter finds his dad's briefcase and we get a flashback that's basically just Peter playing that hide-and-seek game and finding this briefcase under the couch before we cut back to reality. So then up in his room, Peter examines the briefcase and finds the secret compartment. Then we get a flashback continuing the previous one where we meet Peter's dad, and when he finds Peter with the briefcase and he curiously picks it up, opens the secret compartment and pulls out some papers. He looks at them before suddenly walking out of the room and up the stairs, Peter following his father before we cut back to the present. Peter searches through the compartment and finds the picture of Dr. Connors, some sheets of equations with notes in red pen, and a spider encased in amber. Yeah, I guess that's another big thing I'm changing. I hate there's a whole room of spiders that he finds in Oscorp. Having one spider is better, and having a spider that gives Peter powers come from his dad's briefcase gives it more of an air of mystery. He examines this amber, but then Uncle Ben tries to come in. Peter shoves the stuff under his bed, and the amber kind of skitters over to the other end of the room, where a stream of sunlight hits it. I know it's not super scientifically sound, but I think it works loosely considering it's a super spider in there, and it's barely still alive afterwards anyway. So Uncle Ben comes in and brings Peter down to watch wrestling with him. This is kind of what they bond over. So Peter goes back upstairs to work on school stuff, and the spider, now free because the amber has melted, bites him. Suddenly, Peter gets kind of delirious, and he hears a knock at the door and accidentally jumps up and sticks to the ceiling for a second before falling back down. Aunt May walks in and asks Peter what's happened and if he's okay, and says that dinner is ready, but Peter says that he isn't feeling well and would rather just sleep. So he wakes up the next morning and goes to school, where we get the basketball scene with Flash. But afterwards, when he's talking to Uncle Ben at school, that's when he really meets Gwen for the first time. We've seen her earlier in the movie, but she and Peter haven't talked until this point, and now they have plenty to talk about. They flirt a little and Peter goes home. So After that, Peter starts to like Gwen a little and wants to find a way to get closer to her, eventually finding out that she's an intern at Oscorp. He goes to Oscorp, but he can't get in the old-fashioned way, so he uses his powers to climb the building and get in through the window. I don't really have a huge problem with how he got inside in the original film, but I do think it was kinda mean-spirited, and this way he gets to start kind of getting used to his powers. So he spots Gwen, but before he gets over to her, he spots Dr. Connors, recognizing him from the picture in his dad's briefcase. He gets distracted and Gwen is gone by the time he looks back, so he ends up walking up to Dr. Connors, who kind of questions him, but Peter is able to make it seem like he belongs there with his smarts and tells Kurt that he is Richard and Mary Parker's son. And Dr. Connors is kind of shocked just thinking of his past with them, but then endeared, realizing he's talking to Peter Parker. They talk a little bit about his parents, and Connors reveals that he's working on biogenetic engineering to restore his arm by splicing his DNA with the lizards, and Peter is obviously enthralled by that because he got his powers from spider DNA. Peter also brings up the notes he found in his dad's briefcase. Kurt says that some of the research they did involved work with spiders, and that his mom was apparently working on a side project using some of that research to try and create a really strong polymer designed to emulate spider webs, and that she could never quite crack it, and that he couldn't either when Mary asked him to look at it. Peter would love to keep talking to him, but he has to get home, so he gets Dr. Connors' business card and leaves. I think that it works better for the story if after this is when Peter has his first date with Gwen, and that's what makes him miss picking up Aunt May. Though his first date with Gwen isn't dinner at her house, because that's still something that happens later in the movie. So, after that, the whole Uncle Ben's death thing is pretty much identical to how it is in the original movie, though I'm gonna sort of change Peter's reaction to it. In the original, Peter goes on a spree of trying to avenge Uncle Ben's death and just kind of stumbles into being Spider-Man. Not gonna happen, at least not like that. In this version, Peter does have that initial instinct to hunt down Uncle Ben's killer, so he puts on this wrestling mask that Uncle Ben made him so that he covers his face, and he runs out into the night. In a fit of rage, he keeps running down alleyways trying to find Uncle Ben's killer, but eventually he starts hearing someone yelling for help, that someone's attacking them, so he rushes off. He finds himself at a drugstore, confronting a robber. He heroically stops the robber with his powers, but as soon as he sees there's no star tattoo on his wrist, he leaves. He wasn't there to be a hero. He was there to try and avenge his uncle. But that act is what will make him a hero. The next day, we get that montage at the beginning of Peter depressed at school. So then after that, we get a scene where Peter and May are having dinner for the first time without Uncle Ben. It's kind of awkward and sad without him, but they bond a little. They decide to turn on the TV when a newscast from the Daily Bugle shows up. This doesn't have to be J. Jonah Jameson, though it'd be nice if it was. Basically, the newscast talks about reports about a man with spider powers saving a drugstore from an armed robbery. They're calling him Spider-Man. Suddenly, Uncle Ben's words that with great power comes great responsibility, or at least the version of this movie, ring in his head a little bit. This is his first step to becoming Spider-Man. Peter and May talk a little bit about this news headline. Aunt May kind of jokingly brings up the idea of, oh, well, if he has spider powers, does this mean he can spin webs? And Peter says that that's ridiculous, though May says that it sounds like it could be useful, and that's not too out of left field. Suddenly, Peter gets an idea and rushes upstairs where he cracks his mom's formula overnight and builds the web shooters. So he goes out and stops some crimes the next night, running into Captain Stacy along the way and just barely getting away, with Captain Stacy's impression being that he's a criminal, or at least some kind of jerk. The next day, Gwen sets up the dinner date for that night, but before the date, he's at home when Dr. Connors shows up at the Parker house. He's basically there to give his condolences because he's heard about Uncle Ben and to apologize for not staying in the life of the Parkers after Richard and Mary died. So then that night, surprise surprise, when he meets Captain Stacy at Gwen's house. Everything goes pretty smoothly until Mrs. Stacy turns on the news and they're talking about Spider-Man. Mostly talking about how amazing this guy is and how he's kind of a show-off, and they're surprised he's not wearing some big colorful costume with the mask, and that whole thing kind of prompts that fight about Spider-Man and the morality of him. But that also gives Peter a little more of a reason to make that costume. Spider-Man has never really had a good reason for having the costume he does, but that makes it a little bit more relevant. So the next day, Peter meets with Dr. Connors, and you can really tell they're bonding. Clearly, Peter sees Dr. Connors as his new father figure, and Dr. Connors sees Peter as a son figure. Also, I think we saw in 1 or 2 scenes that Dr. Connors had a kid or two in the original, so I think it's safe to say in this version Dr. Connors does not have any kids. So, like in the original, Peter helps Dr. Connors to create his formula. I think a cool way to go about it is if Connors kind of brings up Spider-Man and they use him as a basis for their theory, with Connors theorizing that Spider-Man is a product of genetic engineering and Peter quote-unquote inferring clues about how his powers work. Also, I think it'd be nice if we actually have a scene with Gwen, Peter, and Dr. Connors together, considering the only time that happens in the original version is when Peter first meets Dr. Connors, and that scene isn't this version. So when Dr. Connors refuses to let Oscorp commence with human trials, Ralpha fires Dr. Connors, and it actually has consequences in this version, unlike how he's fired in the actual movie, but just kind of keeps working at Oscorp anyway. So Connors is fired and is sitting at his home lab, which is sort of like a garage away from the rest of the house because obviously he doesn't want anything to go wrong and affect his house. But anyway, he's there and he looks at that day's Daily Bugle. It's a front page article about Spider-Man, hero of the city. He thinks about how this man became a hero likely by using science to create cross-species genetics in a way that Dr. Connors had been researching for years, and he's determined that he won't let Oscorp use his research to hurt people. So he whips up the formula at home, determined to make sure it's safe by testing it on himself. And that's when he becomes the Lizard. And that's at the halfway point of the movie and where I'm gonna stop today because this video is already way too long. But I'll be back tomorrow with part 2 that goes through the second half of the movie. So stay tuned for that and let me know in the comments what you think so far. Don't forget to subscribe for daily videos on the franchises you love, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.